Hey guys, it's Monday, and it's time for another episode of The Breakfast Club. Once again, I apologize for this not being a straight up live video. It has to be a voice recording. I've got a lot going on, and I am recording this pretty much when I can, not in the best of circumstances for video. So much going on today, but I had to make sure to get an episode out today because, well, that's what I'm supposed to do. And I missed too many days before, so I don't want to make that a habit. So, there's something that I want to touch on, considering the many different topics that I've brought up and other people have brought up on the Breakfast Club, and on the kind of political climate and the current discourse in the country and around the world. And that's just this concept of either or, which the more I dwell on thinking on these things, the more I get bothered by that. Including sometimes my own perspectives on things. When I really reflect on them, I get bothered by it. It's, the more politicized things get, or the more extreme things get, and the more people feel that there's so much of the line, the more we're kind of pushed into an either or sort of situation where we're pretty much, it's either this or that, it's either that or this, and you gotta pick a position, and picking that particular position then showcases what quote unquote side you're on, and whether or not somebody can side with you or be friends with you, whatever. And with that sort of thinking, with that sort of outlook, there's no nuance really. It's just straight up black and white. There is no shades of gray. There is no nuance. There's no subtlety. And the problem with that is that's not how life works. Not really. There's always some type of subtlety, or at least most of the time. Usually there's some aspect of a situation that we're not exactly seeing. Now, there are times when having a more extreme particular position, or like basically saying, no, I'm not tolerating this, it's this or it's that. There are times when you need to have that particular position. Usually when, by not choosing a hard side, you're going to end up, causing more problems than good. When you decide to be intolerant of a particular situation or a particular ideology or, event or whatever, there's a good reason for it. Usually it has to do with the preservation of people around you, or for the good of all, or just to solve a problem or to get things done. I understand this. This is not me trying to be wishy-washy about things or being, kumbaya, let's get along. Because I understand that there are times when you do have to kind of put your foot down and go, look, it's either this or that, or I don't have time for it, you don't have to offer subtlety. But there are many times, especially when we're trying to figure things out, or we're trying to better understand something, that we have to make sure not to reduce the conversation to an either or sort of thing. And sometimes it's worth paying attention to the person who may not necessarily be undecided. It's more like they're seeing multiple sides to an issue, and therefore they can't stand entirely on one issue or the other. And maybe it isn't something that can be reduced to just two positions or two ideologies or, two perspectives. Maybe there are multiple ones. This becomes even more apparent when you realize that things in reality aren't just one thing, especially when you start dealing with abstracts. When you start dealing with abstracts, and let's face it, when you're talking ideology, when you're talking personal opinions, when you're talking positions, you're dealing with abstracts. I know we're applying these abstracts to concrete things, but they're still abstracts. And when you're dealing with these things usually aren't tied to just being one or the other. And it's a hard thing for us to deal with because our minds are basically geared toward defining things a particular way, so it's easier for us to navigate the world around us. Our minds need to be able to quickly know that the second it looks at something, oh, that's what it is. We make assumptions all the time. And even though we tend to frame that as a negative thing, don't assume, you never know. That's how our minds work, and it's a survival instinct. I'm pretty sure you've heard of the guy known as the Amazing Randy. One of his favorite tricks that he used to do whenever he did lectures is he'd go up on stage and look a certain way, and he'd be like, by the way, these aren't, like, he'd come up with glasses, for instance, and says, by the way, these aren't real glasses, and he'd pull them out and say, there's no lenses in here, but you guys assumed that there were. And that's because our minds are geared to, like, that's, like, we see something and our minds have to quickly recognize or define things a certain way and accept that as the reality. And it may not be, but it's a useful fiction at that particular moment for us to get on with our lives. Problem is, and that's the reason why the statement "don't assume" comes up, it may not be the truth of the whole story. And when you start dealing with people's perspectives or people's reasons for doing things, or when you start dealing with ideologies or whatever, you have to be careful about assuming things. And you also have to be careful about defining things only one way, because again, when you're dealing with abstracts or you're dealing with life in general, things can be more than just one thing. It doesn't have to be either or. It could be both. Or it could be three things. Or it could be more than that. Let me give you an example. And it's an example that I think is kind of apt for right now, even though it's definitely going to date this recording. But let's bring up an uncomfortable subject and talk about Bill Cosby. We know what he has been accused of. And we know the controversy that has popped up because of it. And because of what's, come about, what's been revealed, he's basically being seen now as something of a pariah. Even to the point where he's now losing accolades. Like, I believe, please forgive me for messing this up, but I believe that he may have even been pulled from, certain awards or something for the Actors Guild or something like that. Somebody correct me, please. But I know that recently certain awards and accolades has been kind of withdrawn from him. Like, so he no longer deserves this. There are people saying that he should give back his Oscars and things like that because of what he's done. And it's been common these days for people to kind of view him as something of a monster. Now, there are loyal followers of his, people who remember his stuff, like, The Cosby Show and some of the movies he's done, and people who remember the work that he's done outside of the entertainment industry. The donations that he's made for, black colleges, for instance, and certain black institutions. People who, see him working tirelessly to try to, improve the lives of youth. And so they look at that and they go, it's not fair what they're doing to him. It's a setup. They're lying on him. He's a good man. Look at what he's done. They're tearing him down on purpose. Yada, yada, yada. And so it's basically turned into an either-or sort of situation. Either he's a monster or he's a hero who is now being unfairly, picked apart. And I look at this going, he's a human being. And human beings are complicated creatures. We're not just one thing or the other. We're several things at once. I really wish that people would remember that, when they talk about this guy. And this is not me saying this because I want people to feel sorry for him. It's more like I want people to realize, how easily we can be swayed or how easily our emotions can go when a particular thing happens. Yes, this is the same man who, acted on The Cosby Show. This is the same man who has told wonderful stories and is, in my opinion, one of the best storytellers in the business. When you've ever seen his classic stand-ups, and even his fairly recent stand-up on, Comedy Central several years back, the guy is damn good at telling a humorous story and taking you along for that. He's clearly intelligent. He clearly cared a lot about, his community, the black community, and tried to do in his way, though he got a lot of criticism for the things he said, in his way, trying to improve the lives of people. Like, he's gone out and done things that people would find honorable. That's one aspect to him, though. One aspect. Then there's also the aspect that these other women that he has, done things to. They've seen another side of him, which is real. That's another aspect to him. So he's more than just one thing. Like, he's a human being and he's a complicated man. Which, by the way, those other aspects don't surprise me because when I look at Bill Cosby, I don't just see The Cosby Show and I don't just see his stand-ups. I also remember what he was like before he got that famous. I remember some of the movies he was in before and how he used to act. Like, people see him as this kind of genteel sort of person. And I remembered, like, back when he was doing films like Uptown Saturday Night, when he played a more wild and wacky sort of character, a sort of mischievous character who was also a bit of a womanizer at times. You know, I remember some of the stand-ups that he did before he did himself. And while people think about the classics, you know, such as, you know, the Noah routine, or some of the stuff that, you know, would later on become the basis for the Bill Cosby, I mean, not Bill Cosby, sorry, the Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids cartoons. You know, everyone leans on those, but I remember having comedy records when he did slightly more racy stuff. Not racy like, you know, say Richard Pryor level or Red Fox level, but still some stuff that was like, wow, Bill Cosby said that. You know, stuff like that. You know, like back when he used to do stuff in Las Vegas. It's funny how people forget about this stuff. And this is the point that I'm trying to make. There are multiple sides to this guy. And because there are different... It's just, he's a human being. We're not always just one thing. We can be several things at once because we live complicated lives, and depending on the moment to moment, depends on how we react to it. It's very rare to find somebody who's just one thing or the other all the time, and we tend to find those people boring, predictable, mundane. And life is not really that way. And if you're living life that's very, very mundane, you tend to get very bored of it, don't you? You tend to get restless. You're like, there's got to be more to life than this. I mean, some people are very content with just being one note, but yeah, their lives aren't very exciting, is it? And people usually don't want to be around them because they don't find them very interesting. Well, that's an aspect of many things in life. It's not just one thing. It's not just one definition. There's more to life than just two positions or just one position. Things can be more than just one thing. I'm going to keep repeating that, but that is what life is. You can look at a tree and just simply think, well, that's just a tree. It's just a plant. To somebody else, it might be the shade that they need on that hot day. To somebody else, it could be a nuisance in their front yard that they got to get rid of because it's kind of, you know, messing up. You know, the roots are growing in toward the house. To somebody else, it's another nuisance because they got to get the branches out the way so that, you know, because it's starting to hit the power lines. To somebody else, it's a great attraction for birds. You know, it's like they happen to be bird watchers. It's, you know, everybody sees something and gets a different aspect from it. It's still what it is. But it can be more than just one thing to many different people. Even though it is, in essence, just a tree. This goes back to certain ideologies, situations, things like that. It's not just one thing. This is one of the major problems with ideologies at times, especially when you stick to it in an ideology to the point where it becomes a gospel truth to you. When you start defining things as only one or the other and not realizing that there's subtleties to this. It doesn't necessarily have to just be one thing or another. It's not just good and evil. It's not just right and wrong. Everybody thinks that they're right whenever they happen to stick up with a particular subject. When they're like, you know, standing up for a particular ideology or a particular individual, they think that they're right. And not just right as in, you know, correct, but right in a moral sense. You rarely find people doing things because they want to be wrong or evil or bad or whatever. And we got that side to ourselves, but for the most part, people stick with a particular position because they feel that it's the right position to take. And that by taking that position, you know, they are being an ethical human being, or they're at least being reasonable. And many times they don't understand why the other people around them don't see it that way. The reason why they don't is because they got their own perspective. And while we try to frame that as, oh, well, you're wrong and I'm right, maybe you're both right and maybe you're both wrong at the same time. And I find that maybe tends to happen a lot more often than we think. Now, I say this not to, you know, persuade people to no longer hold on to a position and stick with it. I mean, if you've got a certain ideology that's worth fighting for, if you feel like a certain position is worth fighting for, then by all means continue to fight for it. But realize that you defining something is limiting your particular perspective. And that perspective is going to be skewed. And that's the one final note that I have to leave. Remember that you are a human being. And that you have a human mind. And that means you're never going to know the whole truth. You just can't. Your mind isn't set up to be that way. Your mind is not an organ that has the functionality of being able to decipher 100% truth. That's why we came up with, science in the first place. It's a discipline that gives us an ability to go beyond our basic human senses and our basic mind functionings in order to come to a better understanding of what's around us. Remember that you can only see in a limited color scheme. You can only see within a certain light spectrum. You can only hear within a certain segment of the entire sound spectrum. Your mind has a hard time grasping things like quantum mechanics. Sure, you can talk about it, but it's hard to really mentally fathom that that's how it is. Like reality, the way reality really is, it's hard for us to think of. We live in a simulation of reality. That's what our mind presents us. And just to, twist the knife even further, for all that we have been able to figure out through science and reason and logic, we still only know, I think, at the most, maybe 5% of the universe and the world around us. Yeah. The brightest minds among us throughout many centuries have only been able to discern about 5%. So what do you think you're going to be able to discern with your mind? Things are not, whatever definition you're going to try to come up with, keep in mind that definition is most likely flawed and that there's more to just one side of things. That's something I really, really want people to understand, especially with today's particular political climate. I'm not saying don't take a stand, but I'm also saying that there's a reason why other people take their stands as well, and it may not necessarily be because they're jerks or because they're idiots or assholes or whatever. Yes, there are people like that. I'm not saying that there aren't. But many times people take that position because that's what they see. And this is why it usually takes groups of people, or why it usually takes several years or several centuries in order to come to some new understanding. Because we need multiple perspectives and many people's viewpoints to be able to fully understand something. Alright, I've yapped on this long enough. This is almost 20 minutes. Hope I've given you guys something to think about. And I'll catch you guys later.